So, thank you, Ranisha. Thank you so much. It's indeed a great opportunity to introduce some of the productive use of energy. The way Selco Foundation looks at the whole the aspect of productive use of energy for the very sort of marginalized and the communities that are very sort of vulnerable situation. And Selco really comes from the very the practitioner's perspective, because the way sort of the Selco Foundation looks at the whole PUE is from the implementation perspective, where the lot of the learnings and processes that are driven, that are actually sort of emerging from the implementation perspective. So just getting into the the topic, sustainable energy, as I mean, I'm sure like all the audience sort of resonate with it. It really is a catalyst for reducing inequality. And Selco, for us, the sustainable energy really is a tool towards development. It's not really looking at energy in an isolation, where you just put a solar panel, or just put a sort of technology, but how do you sort of look at that from a very sort of developmental perspective, where the so how decentralized energy models sort of democratizes the access to basic communities, access of basic amenities to the communities. Not just that, and also how does it actually sort of create long-term assets and resilient pathways for the communities. I think that's where the whole sort of the livelihoods, what we call as here, the whole productive use of energy really comes at the center. And in terms of communities that we work with, Selco always has sort of like looked at the communities that are marginalized, that really sort of in a situation where the safety net really could be brought in by introducing the productive use of energy, the activities with them. And the examples that you see above are sort of very sort of aligned well with the displacement communities that we are talking about today. There are sort of multiple communities even in India, which I mean, India is one of the countries with a lot of internal migration. But even when you look at the sort of the whole displacement community aspect, there are these at the high risk community, the vulnerable communities, and you have the nomadic and migratory communities, as we have in multiple urban and rural settings here in India as well. And then you have the permanently displaced communities, which are it could be from a war, it could be from the climate change disaster, and also the temporary displaced communities because of a drought in a certain season, where they had to move to a different place in search of resources, in search of livelihoods. So these are some of the communities that Selco works with as well, which are aligned with the displaced communities. But apart from this, the sort of the spectrum of communities where energy could bring in the long-term assets as well as the resilient pathways overall. Now, getting in deeper into the PUE, the whole sort of philosophy approach, and then also some of the specific examples of Selco Foundation's work in productive use of energy. So yes, I think as you can see there, we look at the sustainable energy, and livelihood nexus from an ecosystem approach. We will sort of get into the deeper, the details of what it means to be ecosystem approach. But just before that, I just want to sort of highlight, this slide where what what's the sort of the complete picture of how do we look at the productive use of energy and communities nexus when it comes to the sustainable energy solutions. So we look at the three main components as inputs. It's the energy efficiency of technologies, then the whole sort of the sustainable energy, the solar component of it, and also the sustainable built environments. So the nexus between the space where the livelihood activities happen, and then it's complemented with the energy efficient technologies, as well as powering with sustainable energy. That's the sort of the right combination of inputs that we look at. And just to sort of little bit of stress on the fact that the nexus between the sustainable built environment, the working spaces, and the livelihoods is something which we really sort of have considered in all our programs presently, and also going forward. Now, when you have these the right inputs, then the technology obviously becomes a catalyst. You have the technology, but for us, technology is just one piece in the puzzle. Then only when it's combined with appropriate financing, appropriate training and capacity building, then the forward and backward linkages for the entrepreneur and the right policy environment, then only the whole solution becomes more sustainable and more sort of relevant for the community. So we bring in different partners, different stakeholders, into this the whole the sort of equation where the right the financing is done for the technology, then you have the capacity, the training programs are sort of designed and work with local partners in terms of providing the training for the communities. Then also how does it ultimately sort of influence the local, regional, and national policies as well. So what happens after you have these inputs, then you have this whole sort of the supporting ecosystem built, then we will have the aspirational sort of livelihood. So the aspiration changes by introducing this, either modifying or introducing these sort of livelihoods into the communities. And also obviously there is an increased income because of the introduction or sort of the intervention of these solutions as well. And also the other thing in terms of drudgery reduction, to take a a specific example of a pottery maker. So a pottery maker who's using a manual pottery wheel, so that involves a lot of manual drudgery. So when it's actually powered by solar, when it's actually mechanized and with a efficient motor, then it actually changes a lot of equation for the end user, the entrepreneur itself. So this sort of like a equation I would call for the sustainable energy and livelihoods nexus for Selco Foundation. And so I can't sort of stress enough that all this sort of comes from the implementation perspective. Now, a specific example I'd like to take to explain the ecosystem, sort of just going through the ecosystem approach. Now, this is, roti is the Indian bread, and which, would have a lot of relevance in the displacement settings as well, where you sort of, look at the local, snack making or local, bread making or food making, where for this particular machine you see on the left, the solar powered bread making machine, for that solution to be sustainable, right, that solution to be more sort of relevant or really make sense for the end user, then all these different pieces will have to come in together. So what we work with the local technology manufacturers and designers to sort of make that, to sort of build that energy efficient roti rolling machine, the bread making machines, at the same time also looking at the space layout. So how do you make the whole productivity and the overall sort of the space around the livelihood becomes more conducive, and that increases the opportunities of more income for the entrepreneur. Then we also look at the linkages. So obviously Selco Foundation doesn't sort of do it directly, but we work with local partners to make sure that the right linkages are built in. It could be in the form of the market linkages, which for example, if it's an individual entrepreneur in a certain marketplace, how do you look at expanding your market? So we work with local partners in building that. Then one of the most critical parts in terms of financing, so the local banks and cooperative banks, the regional the regional banks, and even the MFI. So we sort of look at how do you build a cash flow based financing, where the financing is the whole sort of the intervention does not add burden to the entrepreneur. At the same time, you design a financing sort of financing model which actually is affordable, at the same time is actually it based on the what increased income that's coming out of the livelihood intervention. And of course for certain interventions you need more training and capacity building, and maybe for others you don't need much. So and then all of these interventions, all of these learnings would actually go into the regional policies, local policies, and to sort of create an environment for these solutions to be more sustainable. Now just coming into the some of the livelihood options that are like sort of what it to suit the underserved communities, where which have a lot of relevance for the displacement communities as well. So we look at I mean, these are some of the verticals that we look at. Agriculture and animal husbandry is really one of the sort of very important value chain that we look at. It could be it could obviously vary from region to region, the value chain that you choose. It could be rice in one region, it could be millet in other region, or also in terms of animal husbandry, depending on the regions, you sort of look at the what sort of value chain makes sense. And then for agriculture, the food processing and marketing, which is again I think very relevant for these the communities where you like such as the urban communities and the communities where the sort of a localized economy needs to be created, a sort of from the production till consumption. That's where it really is very very critical. And then again, looking at from the aggregation to forward linkages to the technologies, and as well as the other parts of the ecosystem. Then obviously textiles and crafts, and I gave the example of a pottery, a potter, or it could be a blacksmithy person. So it's really to look at what sort of these technologies could be, the technologies and financial and business models could be brought in, so that their access to the the income and more income will be improved. And finally, I think the infrastructure, the whole servicing, it could be digital services, it could be the like, sort of you could be last mile healthcare services, or the refrigeration services. So it really looks at sort of these micro enterprises within the sector, which I'm sure, I think, in these communities are going to be very critical as well. Now this sort of just lists out some of the value chain that we have worked, that we have implemented with local partners and champion entrepreneurs as well. I mean, as you can see there, it's paddy to spices, and when it comes to animal husbandry, dairy, poultry, piggery, and then in food processing, it really sort of cuts across the geographies in terms of what is relevant for the geography, what is relevant for that local locality. So based on that, the solutions are developed as well. And then and also the last column as well, where we look at the whole sort of textile and the crafts and arts as well. So the when we look at these, the innovations, when we look at these interventions, it's really looked from a very sort of comprehensive manner. So how does it ultimately bring in the resilience and also makes more sense for the end user community, whereas where the technologies and financing and business model sort of comes in together as supporting pieces. Now to take a specific example of paddy, for example, so the rice value chain, as you can see there are multiple challenges when it comes to rice processing at the last mile, the decentralized rice processing. So obviously the tradition is so far, and you'll have to sort of put a lot of transaction costs for the farmers to go and get the right amount of services. And then that's when a technology like rice huller, the solar powered rice huller, which is, I mean, efficient solar powered rice huller, comes into play, where you have 50% of energy savings. Not just that, but also it sort of brings in the quality in rice as well. And also, I think what is very sort of what is very critical here is uh, the way it's implemented, right? In terms of the business model, is it an individual entrepreneur, is it a farmer producing organization which is doing, which is sort of owning the solution? So really, depending on that, the technology and financing and business models are designed for it. So it could really vary in terms of the type of rice. It could vary from the type of the business model that's there. So depending on that, the solutions are designed to make sure that the solution becomes sustainable over long term. Then just going forward, now when I just taking a specific example of dairy to explain the whole value chain approach that we look at. So when there was a as I explained, the whole ecosystem sort of way of looking at things. At the same time, there's this approach of value chain where we look at across the different nodal points in a value chain. So how does energy play a critical role when it comes to solutions? So taking a specific example of dairy value chain that Selco has implemented across different geographies, across different entrepreneurs and contexts. So from inputs to the cattle, it could be growing fodder from hydroponics, or it could be shaft cutter to cut the grass, and then you have the vaccine storage for the cattle, and then similarly milking machine for production. Then you have milk chillers and refrigerators for collection. Then you also have the sweet making, the value addition products as well in case of processing. Depending on the situation, let's say if you're talking about a displacement setting situation where I think the processing might have a like what do you sort of make out of milk, so that value addition could actually bring in a lot of value for the entrepreneur. Now to give a specific example of of an implementation that we have done in a displacement settings, as you can see at the bottom. So this is a community, in the central south state of Maharashtra, where there's a cattle camp was created for farmers from 60 villages who actually had to move out because of severe drought, who had like more than 8,500 cattle. So when they moved into a camp, which was a temporary sort of a camp for the communities, so they had these cattle, and there was an opportunity for sustainable energy to actually make sort of they make their sort of livelihoods better and more improved. So a solar power shaft cutter was introduced there, where it actually not just reduced the drudgery but also sort of helped the communities to have better solutions for the inputs for the cows inputs for the cattle as well. And then as you see at the top, the milking machine, the the efficient milking machine, which Selco has worked very closely with the technology manufacturer in making the machine more sort of efficient, and then that sort of comes in the production nodal points of the value chain. So it really sort of looks at the overall need for the community when it comes to a certain value chain, and then plug in from the technology, from the business, from the financing perspective in those nodal points. Just a couple of examples that have relevance, quite a bit of relevance in the displacement settings. It could be the poultry farming, which I mean we also observed when we were in Djibouti doing the assessment for the for the overall sort of sustainability interventions. And then as you can see there, it's the sort of the it was it is implemented in one of the sort of least developed states in India, Odisha, with one of the champion local partners in different sort of nodal points in the poultry value chain. Then just coming into the one of the the sort of things we did with in Djibouti with the partnership of Unitar like earlier this year, before the COVID hit in. So this sort of this gave us a lot of insights into what type of businesses, how do you sort of create livelihood opportunities in these scenarios where it creates a local economy. As you can see in the challenges, most of the economic transaction in these communities is very consumptive, where a lot of the resources that comes in that just goes out. So that's where when we went there for the whole sort of assessment activity, there were opportunities of these sort of micro enterprises where the interventions, not just from the technology perspective, but from the right sort of that type of financing, where it could be it could be a revolving fund where the money actually gets revolved, and at the same time the economy is also quite circular. So the production happens there, the consumption happens there, at least for 2 or 3 cycles, where the money actually sort of flow. It's within the communities. And at the same time, there were opportunities such as the food processing, where there was obviously an opportunity for the communities to become sort of increase in, not just increase in income, but also creating these livelihood options that also supports the other sort of economy, the other activities around it as well. Having a cold storage with a micro entrepreneur in these communities would actually sort of encourage the other food processing food making entrepreneurs as well. So considering with some of the activities that could really be enhanced from the PUE, the sustainable energy interventions, where only when it's sort of supported with the right amount of skilling. And then also I think, just to sort of the last point about this is the way infrastructure could be sort of supported so that the economy gets some sort of kick started in this community. That becomes very critical when you look at solutions such as cold storage and solutions like a rice huller, where it becomes an asset for the communities itself. Only when it's supported from that angle, then it actually sort of brings in the sort of kickstarts the economy in these regions. So just it's the last slide. I'm just looking at the clock as well, and I think there was, I think, never better time to understand the criticality of decentralized local economies than now. So COVID-19 really sort of showed the importance of these economies where it's from the production till consumption, which sort of owned and innovated and owned and present in these local communities. As you can see there, there's a sugarcane juice, like juice maker, like a mobile juice maker solution on the left, and then you have the photocopier, the digital services on the right for a physically challenged woman as well. And then you have the pottery maker and solar power refrigerator. I think the whole sort of criticality and relevance of these creating these powerful and empowering local economies was never higher. And I think the sustainable energy does play a very critical role. And I think Selco Foundation has always looked at from the the end user perspective. And I think it's really sort of got I mean it's just become sort of more relevance going forward after COVID-19. So I just want to end the presentation here. And as Ranisha said, the information shared in the link as well, the livelihood solutions that Selco has been working with local partners across different geographies, as well as some of the learnings that we've had during COVID-19 and even prior to that. So I'll stop here. So thank you. Thanks everyone.